The story of the Philippines is a story of movement, a story of journeys. To understand the Filipino people is to understand the currents of history that carried them to these shores. Your ancestors were travelers. Some walked across lands that no longer exist. Some sailed vast, unknown oceans. Some came to trade, others to conquer, and many more to build a new life. The Philippines is the story they left behind, a vibrant, complex tapestry woven from countless threads of migration, culture, and resilience. Our journey begins not thousands, but hundreds of thousands of years ago, in the deep prehistory of humanity. Long before the islands were known as the Philippines, the world was a different place. During the Ice Ages, sea levels were dramatically lower, exposing a massive landmass called Sundaland, which connected the islands of Sumatra, Java, and Borneo to mainland Asia. It was across this land bridge that the first humans, our distant hominin relatives, made their way into the region. As early as 700,000 years ago, evidence from Kalinga in northern Luzon shows that early humans were present, hunting animals like the now extinct rhinoceros. They were pioneers, leaving behind stone tools and butchered animal remains as faint whispers of their existence. For millennia, the story remained buried. Then, in Calao Cave, another discovery reshaped our understanding. Here, archaeologists unearthed the remains of a previously unknown human species, Homo luzonensis. Dating back at least 50,000 years, these small-bodied hominins were distinct from our direct ancestors, Homo sapiens. Their unique mix of primitive and modern features suggests they may have been isolated on the island of Luzon for a very long time, evolving in their own unique way. The existence of Homo luzonensis proves that the Philippines was not just a passageway, but a cradle of unique human evolution. Around the same time, our own species, Homo sapiens, arrived. The discovery of the Taban man in Palawan, dated to about 47,000 years ago, was long thought to be the earliest evidence of modern humans in the archipelago. These were sophisticated hunter-gatherers, people of the coast and the forest. They adapted to a maritime world, learning to cross the sea channels that separated the islands even at lower sea levels. They lived in caves and rock shelters, hunted game, foraged for plants, and mastered the resources of the sea. These early peoples, including the ancestors of today's Negrito groups, formed the first layer of the Filipino identity, a deep connection to the land and sea that endures to this day. Then, around 4,000 years ago, a new wave of migration began, one that would fundamentally shape the cultural and genetic landscape of the entire region. These were the Austronesians. Originating from Taiwan, they were master seafarers, possessing advanced boat-building technology and navigational skills. In their outrigger canoes, or balangay, they embarked on one of the most remarkable expansions in human history. The Philippines was their first major stop, and became a primary homeland from which they would eventually settle nearly half the globe, from Madagascar, off the coast of Africa, to Easter Island in the Pacific. They are the biggest chapter in Filipino ancestry. The Austronesians didn't just bring people, they brought a new way of life. They introduced settled agriculture, cultivating rice, taro, and yams, which allowed for larger, more permanent communities. They brought sophisticated pottery, like the famous manunggul jar, a burial vessel whose lid depicts two figures sailing to the afterlife, a beautiful symbol of their maritime worldview. They brought the art of weaving, creating intricate textiles for clothing and ritual, and crucially, they brought their language. Nearly all of the indigenous languages spoken in the Philippines today, from Tagalog to Cebuano to Ilocano, belong to the Austronesian language family. This shared linguistic heritage is a powerful link to this foundational period of Filipino history. As Austronesian societies flourished, they organized themselves into barangays, small, autonomous communities led by a datu, or chief. Named after the balangay boats that brought their ancestors to the islands, these barangays were the basic political and social units of the archipelago for over 1,000 years. They were not isolated. An intricate network of trade and alliance connected communities across the islands and beyond. By 900 AD, the Philippines was an active participant in the bustling maritime trade of Southeast Asia. The discovery of the Laguna copperplate inscription, the earliest known written document from the Philippines, proves this. Dated to 900 AD, it records the clearing of a debt, written in a script derived from India, and mentions places and titles that show clear connections to the kingdoms of Java and Srivijaya in modern-day Indonesia. Over the next few centuries, this trade intensified. Chinese merchants seeking exotic goods became regular visitors, bringing silk, porcelain, and iron in exchange for local products like pearls, beeswax, and most importantly, gold. The islands were rich in gold, and early Filipinos were master goldsmiths, creating breathtakingly intricate jewelry and ornaments. This era, sometimes called the Age of Gold, saw the rise of prosperous and powerful coastal communities. These societies were not primitive tribes, but sophisticated polities with their own laws, literature and art, deeply connected to the wider Asian world. From mainland Southeast Asia, from China, from India, and later, from the Arab world, waves of traders and migrants came. They added new layers to the genetic and cultural mix, bringing new ideas, technologies, and beliefs. One of the most significant of these new influences was Islam. Introduced by Arab and Malay traders and missionaries starting in the 14th century, the faith first took root in the southern islands of Sulu and Mindanao. This led to the establishment of powerful sultanates, like the Sultanate of Sulu and the Sultanate of Maguindanao. These were highly organized states with centralized governments, legal codes, and extensive trade links stretching to Borneo, Malaysia, and the Middle East. By the time the first Europeans arrived, the Philippines was a dynamic and diverse archipelago of maritime trading states, Hindu-Buddhist-influenced chiefdoms, and powerful Islamic sultanates. It was on the cusp of a new era, one that would be defined by a collision of worlds. In 1521, that collision occurred. A Spanish expedition, led by the Portuguese explorer Ferdinand Magellan, landed in the central Philippines while searching for a westward route to the Spice Islands. Magellan forged an alliance with the ruler of Cebu, but his attempt to assert authority over a neighboring chieftain, Lapu-Lapu of Mactan, ended in disaster. In the ensuing battle, Magellan was killed, and his surviving crew were forced to flee. For the Filipinos, it was a victory for local resistance. For the Spanish, it was a temporary setback. 44 years later, they returned, this time under the command of Miguel López de Legazpi. In 1565, he established the first permanent Spanish settlement in Cebu, and by 1571 he had conquered Manila, making it the capital of the new Spanish colony, Las Islas Filipinas, the Philippine Islands. For the next 333 years, Spain would rule the Philippines. The colony's economic lifeblood was the galleon trade. For 2.5 centuries, massive Spanish galleons sailed annually between Manila and Acapulco, Mexico. They carried silver from the Americas to Asia and returned laden with Chinese silk, spices, and other Asian luxury goods. This trade transformed Manila into a cosmopolitan hub, but did little to develop the rest of the archipelago. The most profound change was religious. Spanish friars and missionaries spread Roman Catholicism with fervent zeal. Through a policy called reducción, they resettled scattered communities into centralized towns built around a church and plaza, making conversion and administration easier. This process reshaped the physical and spiritual landscape of the islands, and Catholicism became a cornerstone of Filipino identity for the majority of the population. Spanish rule was not accepted passively. Throughout the colonial period, there were over 100 recorded revolts and uprisings. These were often local reactions to forced labor, excessive taxation, or abuses by officials and friars. While these early revolts were largely unsuccessful and uncoordinated, they demonstrate a persistent spirit of resistance. In the south, the Islamic sultanates of Mindanao and Sulu fiercely defended their independence, engaging in centuries of intermittent warfare with the Spanish, who never fully conquered them. In the northern highlands of Luzon, the indigenous peoples of the Cordilleras also successfully resisted Spanish attempts at colonization, preserving their own culture and traditions. This legacy of resistance is a crucial, though often overlooked, part of the Filipino story. By the 19th century, the world was changing, and the Philippines was changing with it. The end of the galleon trade and the opening of Manila to world commerce brought new economic opportunities and new ideas. A new Filipino elite emerged, the Ilustrados, or enlightened ones. Often educated in Europe, they were exposed to modern concepts of liberalism, equality, and nationalism. From this class came the propaganda movement, led by figures like the brilliant writer and physician José Rizal, the orator Marcelo H. del Pilar, and the historian Mariano Ponce. They did not initially call for independence but for reforms. They campaigned for the Philippines to be made a province of Spain, for Filipino representation in the Spanish parliament, and for an end to the abuses of the friars. Their novels, essays, and newspapers, though banned, circulated widely and awakened a sense of national consciousness among Filipinos. When Spain ignored the calls for reform and executed José Rizal in 1896, the path of peaceful protest came to an end. A secret revolutionary society, the Katipunan, led by a warehouseman named Andrés Bonifacio, launched an armed revolt. The Philippine Revolution had begun. After Bonifacio's death, leadership passed to Emilio Aguinaldo. On June 12, 1898, with Spanish power crumbling, Aguinaldo declared the Philippines independent. For a brief, glorious moment, the dream of a sovereign nation was realized. The Malolos Congress was convened, and the First Philippine Republic, the first constitutional republic in Asia, was established. But a new global power was watching from the wings, and the fate of the young republic would be decided not in Malolos, but in Paris. The Spanish-American War, which had begun in Cuba, spilled over into the Philippines. The U.S. Navy destroyed the Spanish fleet in Manila Bay, and Filipino revolutionaries, believing the Americans were allies, drove Spanish forces from the rest of the country. But their hopes were betrayed. In the 1898 Treaty of Paris, Spain sold the Philippines to the United States for $20 million. The First Philippine Republic refused to recognize the treaty, leading to the brutal and bloody Philippine-American War. The conflict lasted for years and cost hundreds of thousands of Filipino lives, mostly civilians. The dream of independence was extinguished, and the Philippines passed from one colonial master to another. American rule was different from Spanish rule. The U.S. justified its colonization with a policy of benevolent assimilation, promising to prepare the Philippines for eventual self-governance. They introduced a system of mass public education, with English as the medium of instruction. They built roads, bridges, and hospitals, and introduced modern public health and sanitation. They also established new political institutions, gradually allowing for more Filipino participation in government. However, the economy remained largely colonial, tailored to serve American markets. While the Americans brought modernization, they also suppressed nationalist movements and ruled as a colonial power, shaping the country's culture and institutions in their own image. The path to independence was interrupted by the cataclysm of World War II. Just hours after the attack on Pearl Harbor in December 1941, Japan invaded the Philippines. Outnumbered and outgunned, Filipino and American forces made a valiant stand on the Bataan Peninsula and the island of Corregidor, but were ultimately forced to surrender. The subsequent Bataan Death March, in which tens of thousands of prisoners of war were brutally marched to prison camps, became a symbol of Japanese cruelty. For 3 years, the Philippines endured a harsh occupation. A widespread guerrilla resistance movement fought bravely against the Japanese, paving the way for the country's liberation by Allied forces in 1945. The war left the Philippines devastated, with Manila being the second most destroyed Allied city after Warsaw. Amid the ruins, on July 4, 1946, the United States formally recognized Philippine independence. The Republic of the Philippines was born again. The early years were difficult, marked by the challenge of rebuilding, political instability, and the Hukbalahap Rebellion, a peasant movement that challenged the new government. In 1965, Ferdinand Marcos was elected president. His early years saw significant infrastructure development, but his rule grew increasingly authoritarian. Citing the threat of communism and civil unrest, Marcos declared martial law in 1972. For the next 14 years, the Philippines was under a dictatorship. Congress was shut down, the press was censored, and thousands of political opponents, students, and activists were arrested, tortured, or disappeared. The assassination of opposition leader Benigno Ninoy Aquino Jr. in 1983 galvanized the Filipino people. Discontent with the Marcos regime boiled over. In February 1986, following a fraudulent snap election, millions of Filipinos poured into the streets of Manila for 4 days of nonviolent protest. This was the People Power Revolution. Facing a sea of humanity, and with the military withdrawing its support, Ferdinand Marcos and his family fled the country. Democracy was restored. The event captured the world's imagination, becoming a model for peaceful revolutions in other countries. It was a powerful testament to the Filipino people's desire for freedom and justice. In the decades since People Power, the Philippines has navigated the challenges of a young democracy. The country has faced political transitions, economic booms and busts, and devastating natural disasters. A defining feature of the contemporary era is the Filipino diaspora. Millions of Filipinos live and work abroad. their remittances a vital part of the national economy. These overseas Filipino workers, or OFWs, are hailed as modern-day heroes. At home, the country is a study in contrasts. A rapidly growing economy and a vibrant tech scene exist alongside persistent poverty and inequality. Its culture is a dynamic fusion of East and West, ancient and modern, visible in its food, music, and festivals. Today, Filipinos carry within them this entire complex history. They are the descendants of the first hunter-gatherers and the intrepid Austronesian sailors. Their languages, faiths, and faces reflect centuries of trade with Asia and colonization by Europe and America. They are a people of immense resilience who have overthrown dictators, survived calamities, and built communities all over the globe. The story of the Philippines is not a simple one. It is a story of constant arrival, of adaptation, and of an unyielding struggle for identity and freedom. It is a story that is still being written by 110 million people across 7,000 islands, a true island tapestry.